Imagine waking in a sterile hospital, alarms blaring, antiseptic thick in the air, and realizing something unthinkable has happened. What if a routine surgery turned into your worst nightmare? You drift into anesthesia with hope, only to wake missing the wrong leg. Terror replaces trust, disbelief grips your family, and whispers of negligence ripple through the hospital. Could this tragedy strike you, or someone you love? Sarah Thompson was 34, a devoted mother, a nurse, and the kind of woman whose laughter could light up any room. She lived in a modest brick townhouse on a quiet suburban street, where neighbors waved from porches and children pedaled their bikes past white fences. Her life was stitched together with small joys and steady routines. Every morning, she brewed coffee just the way she liked it, kissed her 7-year-old daughter Emma on the forehead, and headed to the hospital where she worked long shifts. Patients trusted her calm hands, and colleagues admired her empathy, often saying she brought order to chaos. Family was her anchor. Raised by retired teachers, Sarah carried their lessons of compassion and responsibility into adulthood. She was the sibling her brother relied on for advice, the friend who remembered birthdays, the neighbor who always lent a hand. Even after long nights of exhaustion or bills stacking up, she still found time to volunteer at the community center. But beneath her steadiness, life wasn't without struggle. Financial pressures, lingering health issues, and endless responsibilities weighed on her. Still, she met each challenge with quiet optimism. Her garden on the balcony, Emma's endless questions, and the joy of giving back kept her grounded. On one ordinary Tuesday night, as she tucked Emma into bed, Sarah brushed back her daughter's hair and whispered, "No matter what happens, we hold on to each other." She had no idea how prophetic those words would become. It was early morning, the hospital halls dimly lit, the antiseptic smell sharp in the air. Sarah arrived prepared for what should have been a routine surgery. Calm, composed, she checked charts, greeted her colleagues, and trusted the team around her. The operating theater buzzed with a rhythm of efficiency, the hum of machines, the clatter of instruments, the practiced voices of surgeons and nurses. On the surface, everything felt normal. The surgeon reassured her with a nod, the anesthesiologist adjusted the dosage, and the staff marked her leg for operation. But beneath the surface, mistakes began to thread their way into the routine. A chart was glanced at too quickly, a note brushed aside, a hesitation ignored. Small missteps, so subtle they seemed inconsequential, slipped past unnoticed. Sarah drifted into unconsciousness, trusting the professionals. Yet trust would soon be shattered. In that sterile room, the unimaginable happened. The wrong leg was amputated. One irreversible incision, and Sarah's life was forever altered. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A nurse froze mid-step. Instruments clattered to the floor. Voices rose in disbelief. What should have been a straightforward procedure dissolved into chaos. Outside, her family waited, unaware of the devastation unfolding behind closed doors. When officials finally spoke, their words were careful, evasive. Something had gone wrong. But no careful phrasing could soften the truth. Shock tore through her loved ones. Fear, disbelief, and betrayal spread like wildfire. Within hours, whispers echoed in hospital corridors, rumors reached the community, and colleagues avoided eye contact. To outsiders, it was a medical mishap. But to Sarah, it was the collapse of everything she trusted, a personal catastrophe that no apology could undo. The morning after the botched surgery, the hospital was no longer calm and orderly. It felt like a crime scene. Emergency lights buzzed faintly in the corridors, administrators whispered behind closed doors, and investigators arrived with clipboards and sharp questions. News of the wrong leg amputation had already leaked, first to family, then to staff, and soon to the outside world. Sarah's private nightmare was about to become a public spectacle. From the start, the investigation felt less like a search for truth and more like an interrogation. Sarah, still reeling from shock and pain, was asked to recount every detail. What did she remember before anesthesia? Did she notice anything unusual? Who marked her leg? Each question carried an edge, implying fault rather than seeking clarity. Confusion clouded the evidence. Medical logs contradicted each other. Nurses' accounts shifted from one interview to the next. The surgeon's notes were vague, almost deliberately so. Missing files, misfiled schedules, and altered timelines made the truth harder to trace. Yet instead of focusing on the systemic failures, investigators began to turn suspicion toward Sarah herself. Subtle insinuations crept into the questioning. "Why didn't you double-check the chart?" one officer pressed. "Didn't you notice any warning signs?" As if she, unconscious on the table, could have prevented the disaster. Even as the victim, Sarah was treated as though she carried some responsibility. Meanwhile, the media swarmed. Headlines screamed negligence. Local reporters camped outside her home, and social media erupted with brutal commentary. Strangers speculated about her competence as a nurse, her judgment as a mother, even her character. Overnight, she went from respected caregiver to a name synonymous with failure. Every day, the pressure mounted. Witnesses contradicted themselves under the weight of scrutiny. One nurse hinted she had raised concerns, but no record supported her claim. An offhand comment from another staff member was twisted into supposed proof of incompetence. Piece by piece, the narrative shifted away from accountability and towards scapegoating. For Sarah, the investigation became its own form of trauma, a labyrinth of manipulation, coercion, and fear. Each night she lay awake, haunted by the sterile lights of the operating room and the relentless voices of investigators. The hospital had stolen her trust, but now the system itself seemed intent on stealing her truth. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, its cold stone walls reflecting the tension that filled the air. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating: polished wood, fluorescent lights, and the weight of hundreds of eyes fixed on Sarah Thompson. Cameras flashed as she entered. Reporters whispered, pens scratching furiously, while families on both sides sat rigid with dread. From the first moment, Sarah realized the system was stacked against her. Missing documents, delayed filings, and technical oversights crippled her defense. The prosecution, sharp and relentless, painted her not as a victim, but as someone complicit in her own tragedy. Their narrative was simple, convenient, and devastating. Sarah had ignored warning signs, failed to question, and therefore shared blame. Witness after witness was called. Nurses contradicted themselves, their testimonies fractured and inconsistent. Surgeons shifted timelines under pressure. Yet instead of exposing systemic failure, the prosecution twisted every contradiction into evidence of Sarah's supposed negligence. The most crushing blow came from a single manipulated remark. Taken out of context, it was presented as near confession, the damning proof the jury needed. Sarah's protests went unheard. The defense argued tirelessly, but every piece of evidence that might have absolved her was dismissed, buried beneath procedure. Behind her, Sarah's family sat in silent agony. Her daughter, Emma, clutched her grandmother's hand, confused and afraid. Her husband's jaw tightened, his expression hiding the storm inside. Sarah felt her identity unraveling on the stand. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for the truth of who she was. But as the trial unfolded, it became clear. This wasn't about uncovering the facts. It was about sealing her fate. The courtroom was silent when the jury returned. Every shuffle of paper, every cough echoed like thunder in the stillness. Sarah sat frozen, her hands trembling beneath the table, her eyes fixed on the floor. The foreman rose, voice steady, almost detached. "We find the defendant." A pause. So long it felt like time itself fractured. "Guilty!" Gasps rippled through the room. Sarah's mother wept openly. Her husband closed his eyes, unable to look. And Sarah? She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, a hollow stillness swept over her, the quiet devastation of someone watching the world collapse in slow motion. The judge's gavel struck, final and merciless. Sentencing would come later, but the verdict had already sealed her fate. In that moment, Sarah wasn't a nurse, a mother, or a victim of malpractice. She was a criminal in the eyes of the law. The irony cut deepest of all. The hospital's errors had destroyed her body, but the system's verdict had destroyed her life. And for Sarah, the weight of both was unbearable. After the verdict, Sarah's world dissolved into fragments. Overnight, she went from respected nurse and devoted mother to an outcast branded by shame. Neighbors who once greeted her with warmth now averted their eyes. Former colleagues distanced themselves, fearful that defending her might endanger their own careers. Inside the prison walls, Sarah was stripped not just of freedom, but of identity. She replayed the surgery in her mind endlessly, as though reliving it could somehow rewrite the truth. Nights were the hardest, fluorescent lights buzzing above, cold concrete pressing against her, and the unbearable silence that followed each passing hour. Her family carried the weight outside. Her husband battled endless bills, legal debts, and whispers at work. Her daughter, once bright and carefree, grew quiet, shrinking under the cruel stares of classmates. Sarah had always taught her to stand tall in the face of adversity, but now Emma watched her mother's name drag through the mud, and the lesson rang hollow. Meanwhile, the hospital thrived. Administrators distanced themselves from the scandal, filing polished press releases and deflecting accountability. For them, Sarah's conviction was a convenient shield, the perfect scapegoat to bury systemic failures. But not everyone accepted the narrative. Journalists began to dig deeper, uncovering inconsistencies in the investigation. Whistleblowers hinted at cover-ups, missing records, and pressured testimonies. Slowly, whispers of doubt began to creep back into public discourse. For Sarah, however, the damage was already done. Her reputation, her livelihood, her sense of self, all shattered. Yet beneath the rubble of despair, a faint ember of resolve flickered. If the system had taken her voice, she would find another way to be heard. Sarah's tragedy wasn't just a story about one woman's suffering. It exposed the rot festering within institutions we're taught to trust. Hospitals that should heal instead protect their reputations. Courts that should uphold justice instead bow to convenience. Investigations meant to uncover truth instead manufacture scapegoats. Her case revealed a cruel pattern. When systems fail, they rarely punish themselves. They punish the vulnerable. They twist victims into culprits, not to fix what's broken, but to protect those in power. Sarah's name became a symbol, not just of personal loss, but of systemic betrayal. Her story forces us to ask, how many others have been silenced, discarded, or destroyed in the same way? The bigger truth is this: injustice doesn't always wear chains or uniforms. Sometimes, it hides behind white coats and wooden gavels. Sarah's story is more than tragedy, it's a warning. If it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. That's why we can't stay silent. Share her story. Talk about it. Demand accountability from hospitals, investigators, and courts. Every voice raised makes it harder for institutions to bury the truth. And if this story moved you, subscribe, stay connected, and join us as we uncover more hidden injustices the world needs to see. Because silence protects corruption, but together, our voices can protect people like Sarah.